Where are strongmen going wrong with their training? Today we're going to look at 5 different areas. We're going to look at testing, technique, exercise selection, periodization, and some psychological factors. One of the things I see strongmen doing constantly wrong with their training is not doing enough testing, and some of them are not doing any testing at all. You need to have a reason and a system to identify and fix weak links if you want to get better as an athlete. You need to be looking at the bigger picture. Now, we're always testing maximal strength, but what about the other strength qualities? What about explosive strength? What about speed strength? What are you doing to identify these weaknesses and then fix them moving forward? One of the things I like to do is use a testing system whereby someone would finish the block and then they would have 2 days of testing. That week would be deloaded on purpose to allow them partial recovery so they can do well on these tests. In the testing, I have 2 days, which is usually an upper day and a lower body day. In the upper body day, the main lift I'm looking at testing is going to be the behind the neck press. Why? This has a massive transfer to all of the overhead events within strongman. It's not just a case of testing their maximal strength though, because the behind the neck press is a fantastic predictor of shoulder health due to the fact that you need adequate mobility if you're going to be able to use this lift at all. After the behind the neck press, I usually take the time to look at 2 shoulder stabilizers. More often than not, I'll look through their program and we'll go, what's weak, or what are we trying to build up? More often than not, with my strongman clients, the lower trap or trap 3 raise and the power raise are the best predictor lists for them, and they're the ones that they're usually lagging behind. Equally, you could be looking at posterior delt, you could be looking at a partial get up, but 2 predictor lifts on the shoulder stabilizers after behind the neck press will usually give you an hour's worth of testing, which is perfect. For the lower body test, we're going to test a wider range of strength qualities. I like to look at isometric back extension strength. I like to look at the explosive strength with regards to using an overhead toss. The overhead toss is a fantastic predictor of explosive strength overall because it's the whole posterior chain working. If you don't have access to the overhead toss, you could simply look at using a power snatch from the hang, which is a very similar movement pattern. After that, I like to look at explosive strength with regard to the penta jump. Normally I would do this unilaterally to see if there's any bilateral deficit. Another reason for the penta jump is general athleticism. You'll notice that Mitch Hooper, who just won World's Strongest Man, he's not just one of the strongest on the planet, he can literally lend his hand to anything. He's quite athletic, and athleticism is often a missing part of a strongman's testing criteria, but the unilateral penta jump kind of involves and recruits this. Finally, we want to look at their strength endurance or their power endurance for the lower body. For this, I use the test of putting your body weight on the bar if you're a male, 70% of your body weight on the bar if you're a female, and doing as many raw, so no assistance gear, full range, arse to the grass back squats as you can within a minute. The standard I usually push my athletes towards is they have to get at least 40 reps in this. Moving on to technique and looking at where strongmen might be going wrong with this. The thing that I see done more often than not is suboptimal techniques. You use a technique with a limited ceiling. You want to use the technique with the highest potential. You've got to remember strength is a marathon. Z became the best in the world because he was able to add kilos to all of his lifts over, say, a 10-15 year period. He didn't just do it day one. He wasn't the best on day one, but eventually he got there. You need to look at strength in terms of a long game. You don't want to be using a technique that can only get you to, say, a 300 kilo deadlift. You want to be using the technique that, say, in 2 more years over that gets you to a 350 kilo deadlift. With that in mind, let's take a look at hitching. This is one of the things I would say is wrong with regards to using a suboptimal technique. Is hitching allowed in strongman? Yes. Should you do it in training? I wouldn't say so. I think it's an inefficient movement pattern. I think as you're pulling the deadlift up, it teaches your body or your posterior chain to literally shut off, push your knees forward and hitch the movement. The rule I give my clients with regards to training is you're allowed 1 hitching rep per session. As soon as you do that, boom, you stop the series, you move on. You're not allowed to recruit it. More often than not, it's a habit. Habits need to be eradicated. The more you do it, the more you're going to recruit it. So if you want to eradicate a habit, you need to minimize it. So as soon as my clients do 1 hitch, boom, I would say stop. You're not allowed to go on again. Another suboptimal technique and way of thinking that I get a lot from my clients, and I see a lot with regards to strongmen, is the jerk versus push press argument. I've got a great article on my website that goes into more depth, but more often than not, the reason people go for a jerk is it feels easy. Well, it always fucking feels easy. It's a speed strength movement. There's no grind. When it comes to strict pressing or push pressing, you could get to a point where there's a grind so you can press through, but that can actually be to your advantage. So more often than not, people opt for a jerk because it feels easy right now. But if they do a push press and maybe do 5 years of work, they can get to world record standards. But with a jerk, they're just not able to get there. So you need to look at the movement that's going to get you the highest potential in the long run. Another thing I see strongmen do is only using one technique. If you want to get the strongest you can, you need to expose yourself to a wide variety of movement patterns. I go back to my example of Mitch Hooper and being athletic. He may have this natural innate ability, and some others may also have it too, but you can work on it. If you expose yourself to different movement patterns, different techniques, this is going to help you in the long run. It's going to improve the amount of connections you can build within that event. One of the ways of doing this is what I refer to as hidden GPP. Weightlifters call it bar play. It's doing different things in your warm-up sets. So if we look at the monster dumbbell, you look at the technique that Dimitar Savatinov uses for reps. He pulls it to his shoulder and he thrusts it straight off. It's a speed technique. It's going to be way better than any other technique out there if you can master it. More often than not, people give up on it because they're weaker at it. Well, yeah, you're going to be weaker at it because you've never done it before. But if you put a little bit of work on it in your warm-up sets, over time, again, playing the long game, you can become really good at this technique, and then you can be quicker than your opponents on that event. It's also another great way of enhancing explosive strength. You don't just want to look at your maximal strength capability. In strongman, you are tested through all strength qualities, from explosive strength all the way up to maximal strength. So you want to be exposed to as many different strength qualities as you can. And an easy way to do this is to look at your warm-ups. Another thing I do with the monster dumbbell is I have people do both arms. If you've got a certain weight that you can do with both arms, you might be able to get more reps because your, say, strong arm hasn't tired out. So you could start off with your strong arm, do 4 reps, quickly do a cheeky rep on your weaker arm, and then go back to your strong arm, enabling you to get a higher quality because you've had a little bit of rest period. You will also get stronger on your strong arm from doing your weaker arm because of mirror neurons. If we look at the complete opposite, I also see people constantly changing their technique weekly. They're not sticking with something. Again, more often than not, people change because it feels weak initially. Yeah, I had to change my squat stance because I had a lot of lumbar flexion or butt wink recently, and it made me weaker. But if I kept on doing the inefficient pattern, all that was happening was I was having lower back injuries. Yes, I felt weaker, but in the long run, I'm going to be injury-free and train for longer. So you need to stop looking at the world through a straw and use the techniques that can get you long-term success. So constantly switching technique weekly. One of the things I hear more often than not is, I saw X do this, I saw Brian Shaw do this, so I'm going to copy them. But you don't know why that athlete's doing it. You need a solid reason why. Then you need to stick at it. You cannot do one technique for 1 week and another technique the other week. Let's look at exercise selection. Another thing I see constantly done wrong is not giving enough priority to remedial quality. This is assistance work quality. This is not just a case of figuring out random movements and just doing them willy-nilly. You need to have another reason to do it. I recently took on a new client and he'd been working with a strength coach for quite a while, but he had an inability to perform a split squat. This guy can do an over 300 kilo squat, but can't do a bodyweight split squat. It's embarrassing. You need to be able to do all motor patterns. You need to be good at everything if you want to be good at strongman. So this client's going to be given a lot of split squats coming up so he can improve the amount of control and reduce any kind of bilateral deficit and reduce any mobility issues. With that in mind, you see it loads of times in strongman. A lack of mobility is a really bad thing. Let's take the upper body, and something I see often in strongman is a lack of overhead mobility due to tight lats and or lack of thoracic mobility. This is like putting a handbrake on your press. If you cannot push your arms up over your head and hold the log or axle overhead with all of your joints stacked, you have a lack of mobility. I taught this on my log workshop where they could identify whether they're in a squat, the log rack position or the log overhead and literally see the exact area that was tight. But tight thoracic and tight lats is easily fixed, but so often seen within the sport of strongman. Another thing you see is a lack of low intensity or motor control drills. Dr. Peter Lundgren is my go-to expert for this. But notice how when you get injured and you go and see an injury expert, a physio, a chiro, an osteopath, notice how they always give you things like dead bugs or isoclams, but you ignore it. You're not paying attention to the low intensity GPP movements that you need to restore the connections in your body to then get you to peak level strength. Again, if you asked Mitch Hooper to do isoclams, dead bugs, I bet he can do them perfectly. When you go and do them, you ignore them, but you can't do them perfectly. If you can't do something perfectly, there's no point ignoring it if you want to reach the highest level. Another area within exercise selection is a lack of specificity. It's a lack of attention to detail. My opinion is the best strength coaches can give attention to detail, but they also know when to narrow in the focus. Let's look at some specific examples. Flat extension versus overhead extension for the triceps. They both work the triceps, but which one's more similar to overhead? Why are you doing flat extension right before a comp when an overhead extension is going to transfer more? Why are you doing an overhead extension on a cable when you could do it with a Swiss bar, give you the stability element, which has even more transfer? So you need to look at specificity and transfer, and this comes from attention to detail with regards to periodization and program design. Another area is partial deadlifts. You're not going to be able to transfer deadlifts from the floor to a partial deadlift. I've seen it before. I've seen it on the world stage where there was a world-class deadlifter from the floor. I think he was pulling around over 450. He was in the world final. He wasn't able to transfer this strength from 18 inches. The reason being is he was so quick, it was a dead area of strength. So as he transferred through the 18-inch mark, he's using speed and momentum and velocity, so his muscles aren't firing. So when you make him start from that range, he wasn't able to pull maximally. So again, attention to detail, specificity. You need to train specifically if you want the best results. One of the things I did, and I know that Rob and James Ward and even Aaron McGowan did when I was training or competing against them as an under 90s, we would go and train on the specific implements. A great example of this is Dave Mears' 18-inch deadlift. Anyone that's been to Britain's or England's and had a competition run by Dave Mears and had this exact example, or has been to Dave's gym, know that it wasn't really 18 inches. It was actually a little bit over. It could be 19 to 20 inches. Now, this isn't any disrespect to Dave, but if you go and train on the specific implements, you would find this out. This actually allowed a lot of us to put our knees under it and treat it like a hip lift, because we knew that when we saw that come up in comp, we would train from a little bit higher. So if you can, you go and train on the exact implements. Another example is the OSG yoke press. It caught a lot of people out, but if you paid attention, and again, I had to learn the hard way from this and looked at some of the Australians training on it, you would notice the amount of pendulum on it and the way it swung. So if you can, go and train on the comp implements. If you can't, speak to people that are and see what you can get from videos and technique work that they're doing. Another embarrassing mistake is including shit that isn't in the competition or isn't in your final goal. It's like wanting to keep a deadlift in when you're trying to maximize log performance. You may want to feel strong. You may want to feel good about yourself and the fact that your deadlift number's going up. But think about it, the final 4 to 6 weeks, if all you've got to focus on is a max log, the deadlift isn't conducive to that goal. It can lead to injury if your deadlift form is poor, but it can also lead to huge fatigue levels that affect your performance in the log in the gym and then affect your peak. Moving on to periodization, which is a topic I'm extremely passionate about, and I could probably go on for days here with regards to what strongmen might be going wrong, but we're going to narrow it down to the most important. Top of my list is not using tempo. My opinion is every fucking exercise should have a tempo. You could change a sled drag by going 1-0-1-0 on a deliberate walk to X0 where you're trying to explode. The tempo will dictate the strength quality you're trying to recruit, and then it will change the kind of tension. For instance, eccentric training, if utilized properly, can help you identify your potential for improvement in that exercise within the next few weeks. Depending on how strong you are eccentrically will dictate how strong you can get concentrically. Also, take the example of different tempos. Let's do 5 reps. Person 1 does it as 5 down, 5 up. Person 2 does it as 2 down, 4-second pause, back up. And then the next person does whatever quick tempo they want, like 2-0-X0, 1-0-X0. The tempo can dictate the response you're after. If maybe you want to improve or reduce co-contraction, maybe you want to improve their ability to overcome inertia from a dead stop, or maybe you want to improve their speed with a quick tempo. Giving somebody tempo is a big game changer with regards to strength results. Another thing that drives me potty in the strength world, especially in strongman, is just performing the exact event as opposed to periodizing. They get a medley in a competition and they literally perform the medley over and over and over. This leads pretty much just to accommodation. You're not going to improve it. You may get a little bit better at it, but you're not going to improve it as much as if you periodize, or at least identify where you're weak within that event and then periodize to the comp. With regards to endurance and medleys, you want to go heavy at first, then you want to periodize into endurance. You want to be strong, so then when you go to the endurance transfer, you are stronger at that event. If the sandbag medley has a 120 sandbag and your max sandbag effort is 130, that's a very high percentage. If you spend, say, 4 to 6 weeks getting better at sandbag and take your potential to 160, when you go and transfer into endurance, that's at a lower intensity, that's at a lower percentage, which means your endurance capability is going to skyrocket. The next one's very obvious to me, but not to everyone. Too much volume. I use the 55-minute rule. I've been called out for it before on social media. I don't really know why, because I have no benefit to trying to sell this to you. After 55 minutes, you're going to become a bit more catabolic. That is even in the case of people that are on anabolics. So I use the 55-minute rule with all my athletes. When I program, I can show you every single session I do. There isn't a single one that goes over 55 minutes after warm-ups. That's an important marker. This is from set 1 to the final set. There are many coaches that espouse very high volume, very long sessions, and they do get good results with these guys, but it's not good results with everyone. The guys that they get good results with this, if they can survive the training, they're gifted. If you can handle the volume, you're going to progress. But there will become a point where that person either breaks down because you're overloading, or it's just a case of it doesn't work with everyone. I highly recommend you use the 55-minute rule. If you're taking that much longer, you're either making friends or your work capacity sucks. What I would say though is if you want to split your workouts, if you have the time, do your heavy stuff in the morning and then wait 4 to 6 hours later, maybe you've got a work day, and do your assistance work in the evening. This actually improves the quality, but it can improve the amount of work you can possibly do. Another obvious mistake that we all make, especially early on, is too many heavy days. When you're weak, you can handle this. When you're neurologically inefficient, you can get away with maxing out more often. You can make those newbie gains. As you reach world-class levels, this isn't the case. Point in case, go back to what Louie Simmons was doing with his conjugate method. He had 2 heavy days for a reason. This allowed them to recover. I see it way too often. And if we look at what Louie did over years and years, and I know it's powerlifting, but it's the same concept. We're all humans. It's the same physiological principles. He had 2 exposures a week, 2 exercises. It was 1 upper body press and then 2 lower body movements. What I found is you can get away with 3 on your neural day, say on lower. You could do a deadlift, a yoke, if that 3rd is a bit more either speed or endurance based. With that in mind, you're going to look at me and say, there's too many events to do. We haven't got the time. And event days can be incredibly long and they can get you match fit. So there is a little bit of a basis to using them. But what I would recommend is you can't fit all your events in on 2 days if you've got 4 lower body or maybe even 5 lower body based events. So the easy way of looking at this is to alternate events. I would stick to the 2 to 3 rule, but alternate it. You could have yoke 1 week and then you could do farmer's walk the next. That's going to allow you to avoid accommodating, but get you the necessary exposure to each event to allow you to peak for comp. I'm not a fan of programming numbers specifically or percentages. I think it's lazy. I also think you're not a weightlifter. This has more application to speed strength movements like weightlifting than it does to strongman or maximal strength sports like powerlifting and strongman. I think it's lazy coaching because it's just a case of do this, I don't have to think about it. I think it doesn't take into account things like tempo. It doesn't take into account things like technique, where people are with their peak and where people are within their program. I'm not a fan of it. You're not a weightlifter. I don't believe you should be doing it. I think it teaches lazy athletes. I much prefer effort. Effort dictates your strength response, but also will help you dictate your recovery. Another thing I see so often in the sport of strongman is not using an off season. You're trying to peak too often. I actually think strongman is moving towards what's happening in football. The complaint in football currently is there's too many competitions. Now in football, they have to do the competition. But in strongman, you don't. You can be selective. And just because there's a competition coming up doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because you got an invite from a promoter and he's making you feel fantastic doesn't mean you have to say yes. You need to look at it in terms of what this does for you and your strongman career, or the end game. If you want to win worlds and you've got a comp 2 months before, I'd highly recommend you say no. Yes, you might be able to get a little bit of money out of it, but more often than not, it's not even paying for the accommodation and flights that you have to pay to get towards and actually compete in this comp. So you have to think in terms of your end goal. Now, is your end goal to earn as much money and do as many comps? Yeah, crack on, do that. If you want to win worlds and win the comps with the highest prestige, I suggest you plan a bit more. Planning a bit more every 12 weeks, more often than that, and you're going to be leading to burnout. Again, strength is a marathon. You want to be getting strong in the gym. Don't use examples like Big Z. He's the greatest of all fucking time, and a lot of the comps he was doing, he was only competing at 80 to 90% of his max, so he could recover and get away with it. But don't use that as an example. Get in the gym, do your work, peak. Come off, deload, get in the gym, do your work, peak. Continue to do that over your career and you'll get substantially better results come the end of it. Another area strongmen always get wrong is just before and just after competition. I've seen it before. People take a whole week off before competing. Now, fatigue does mask fitness. If you're overtrained to fuck, yeah, taking a week off may allow you to supercompensate. But for some of you, it may detrain you ever so slightly. It may remove your sharpness. I wouldn't ever recommend taking a full week off. The hardest protocols, the overtraining protocols I give to people, they don't even need more than 5 days off before they come back into the gym and hit PBs. And these guys are training twice a day for 2 weeks. So it's very doubtful you're training that hard that you need to take a full week off before competition. It doesn't make sense to me. The other end is the other side of that. It's not taking 5 to 7 days off the gym after a competition. I get it all the time. People wake up on the Monday, oh, I feel great. It's not impressing me. What would impress me is a little bit of patience, a little bit of like taking a step back. You need to get back in the gym and be absolutely raring to go, chomping at the fucking bit, not like, oh, I feel okay. So I would say it's much better to take 5 to 7 days off the gym. In fact, I would recommend what my mentor told me, Charles Poliquin, and that's to do the opposite activity. Go and play table tennis, go for walks, go for a swim, do the opposite activity to strength training, then come back in the gym the following Monday raring to go. Maybe at the end of the week, after 5 days, we do the testing, but that's about it. It shouldn't be a strenuous week. You should be chomping at the bit, raring to go on that new block, rather than coming in after a competition. The analogy I use in a competition is a full competition, 6 events, or even just 5 events. It's like being involved in a car crash. It's like being involved in a game of rugby. It's very demanding to your nervous system and body. What you feel on Monday, it may feel different later on. Sometimes you don't feel central nervous system fatigue, so you need to wait it out until that following week. The final area we're going to review is psychological. And the main thing strongmen do wrong, and this is probably the same for all strength athletes, is you're focusing on others instead of yourself. You see your competitor do a big lift and you think, fuck, I'm behind the game. He's stronger than me right now. But nothing is won in the gym. It's won in the competition. If your coach is holding you back from doing that maximal lift in the gym, it may be for a reason, so you can peak on the day. Nothing, again, is won in the gym. You want to win on the day. You want to peak on the day. So veering off plan and letting an opponent's lift on social media dictate what you do in the gym is utterly retarded. Peak on the day, not in the gym. You don't want to look at what your competitors are doing. Brian Shaw did this best. He rarely posted gym vids. He just wanted to do the work, turn up, win. And that is the winning mentality you need to take on if you want to reach the top.